over the years as part of the Berkshire family. It started early, and they had the most service-oriented company you could imagine. So it would have done fine without us, but I think it will do even considerably better and get there faster. It would have done fine without us, but I think it will do even considerably better and get there faster, certainly in the primary in intrinsic value. And I think that additionally we had a significantly greater amount of invested assets per share to work with. So I feel good about what happened with intrinsic value last year. The problem is doing it year after year after year. Charlie?
Just basically, we have a wonderful bunch of businesses, and we have a float that keeps increasing, and a pretty good record of doing pretty well in marketable securities. None of that has gone away.
Zone 12.
Hello, my name is Elias Canner, and I am from New York City. Mr. Buffett, thank you for this entire weekend. I met you at the ball game on Saturday and at Goratz yesterday. It was a great honor for me each time.
Thank you.
My question is this. Mr. Buffett, will you groom a younger man or woman as your heir apparent? If so, when might you do this? When I say younger, I mean a person 15 to 20 years younger than yourself. Of course, I'm not complaining. You're the best in the world.
Well, 15 or 20 years younger is a lot easier to do than it used to be. A large percentage of the world's population is now eligible. We have today the people to take over Berkshire. There's no problem about that at all. They have been named in letters that the directors have, and they are in place. Exactly who will be the two people will, of course, or it could be one person, will depend on when Charlie and I are out of the picture. I mean, if we'd written the letter 10 years ago, it might have been different than today. It might be different 15 years from now. So our death or incapacity, the timing of it will determine exactly who will be the current person in that letter. But we have those people in place. They don't need to be groomed from this point forward. They exist. They're ready. They'd be ready to run Berkshire tomorrow morning, and I think you'd be quite pleased with the job they did, and that's why I don't worry about having. I've got 99.75% of my net worth in Berkshire, and I don't want any of it sold. If I knew I was going to die next week, I would not want it sold in the coming week, and I don't want it sold after I die. I feel very comfortable with the businesses and the managers and the successor top management that we have at Berkshire, but I just don't want them to take over too early. Charlie?
Yeah, I actually think that the prospects for continuity of corporate culture, to the extent we have one, at Berkshire is higher than prospects for continuity of corporate culture at most other large public companies. I don't see Berkshire changing its way of operating, even if Warren were to expire tonight. And I think that the capital, the fresh cash, would be allocated less well. But as I've said at past shareholder meetings, well, that's too damn bad.
That's why we don't have a public relations department.
By the way, I don't think the job would be ill done. I just don't think it would be done quite as well as Warren does it.
Okay, Zone 13.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. I'm Cary Blecker from Wellington, Florida. Thank you for stopping by the convention center before, Mr. Buffett. It was nice to see you again.
My pleasure.
Recently, much has been made of the fact that Berkshire is the largest company to not be included in the S&P 500. Do you gentlemen have an opinion or what is your opinion as to whether Berkshire should be included and why? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a question we've gotten asked quite often since the General Re deal was announced. Berkshire, if you talk to the S&P people, I think they would say, and I think they've even said it publicly, or at least a representative has, that we certainly qualify in every way that, except from what they might term the liquidity standpoint. It's probable that maybe it's 6%, maybe 7% of the investment funds, the equity funds in the United States are indexed, and the number is, or the amount is going up somewhat as we go along. I saw an article to the contrary on that, but I think they had it wrong. The amount of money, index money, is, in my view, rising month by month. So if you were to put Berkshire into the index tomorrow, in effect, you'd have a market order to buy 6 to 7% of the company, or roughly 100,000 shares of A. That would not be good. The stock would obviously spike up dramatically, as some stocks already have when they've been added. There have been some. I've looked at the list of all the companies that have been added, and some have moved up substantially. And we would have there'd be even more impact at Berkshire than the typical stock, because our stock is fairly tightly held. Most people don't want to sell it. There are two solutions to that. Three solutions, being one of them being not to put us in the index. But we are I think probably the most significant company in the United States that isn't in the index in terms of market value and a lot of other factors. So if you want to put Berkshire or a company like it in the index and not have some crazy market aberration, you could have one of two things happen. And this would be true, I think, more and more of other companies as well as they add them to the index and as more money gets indexed. One, you could have the company agree that at the time it was added to the index, that simultaneously the company itself would sell an amount of stock that was about equal to the index buying that would be generated. In other words, if we were to offer 100,000 shares roughly of A stock at the same time as being added to the index, that would neutralize the index buying. The only problem with that is we don't want to sell 100,000 shares or 10,000 shares or 100 shares of A stock at Berkshire unless we have some very good use for the money. It isn't going to happen. So we're not going to do something like that just because we want to be in an index. The other possibility, and I believe this was used in Australia when a very large mutual life company converted to stock. I think it was the largest company. A very large mutual life company converted to stock. I think it was the largest company, and that would be to phase in the weighting, say, over a 12-month period, so that it was 1/12 weighted the first month, 1/12 weighted the second month, and so on. That means, in effect, there would have to be a market order once a month for a 0.5% roughly of Berkshire. Well, I don't think that would be very particularly disruptive. And I think there would be, once you knew that phase-in was coming, there would be some anticipation, so that you would not get big spikes in the stock and dips subsequently. I think that would be a logical way, but Standard & Poor's to date has not had to do that sort of thing, and they may have various reasons, and various good reasons, for not wanting to do that. Now, if indexation continues to grow as it has, and you get a situation where 15% of the money becomes indexed, I think they're going to have to come up with some approach similar to one of these two that I've named, or that it will simply get too disruptive to the market. It would be interesting. I know American Online has behaved very well since it was introduced to the S&P some time back, but I would think that it might get to be the case that if you simply shorted the companies that got added to the S&P after the S&P effect had been felt, you might find that those stocks would tend to underperform, as that one artificial buy order, in effect, its impact wore off. So I think something is going to happen. I think indexation has far exceeded what anybody anticipated, including S&P or including me or Charlie, and I think there's been a good reason for it to develop. I think as it continues to develop, it will have more and more impact on the market in ways that probably S&P is not that excited about, nor would the index funds be that excited about. So there is likely to come a solution to the liquidity problem that might be particularly acute at Berkshire, but that prevails throughout the market that occurs when stocks are added. And I would think if they adopt some solution, that certainly if they adopted the solution of gradual weighting, that Berkshire would be a very logical candidate for the S&P. It really makes no difference to us what is done along that line. We would not be unhappy being in the S&P as long as it didn't have some huge market impact at the moment of putting it in. On the other hand, we love the owners we've got, and I don't see how we could improve on this group much by having the index funds. So we'll see what happens on it. It is not a big deal to us, and we want to be sure if we're ever at it, it isn't too big a deal to the market, because I would not like, the people who sold that day might like it, but I would not like the stock to jump up, $20,000 a share on one day because there's some market order for 100,000 shares and then gradually work its way back down to where it should have been in the first place. No one benefits from that except the people who sell in the very short term, and that is not the group that I primarily worry about. Charlie?
My guess is that Berkshire will eventually be in the S&P index. Somebody will figure out how to do that sensibly. Maybe not soon, but someday.
Okay. Zone 1.
Okay. My name is James Claus, and I am here from New York City. Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, today we've already heard you talk about a few countries outside of the U.S. here, and my question is, if you were directly investing equities outside the United States, what would be your requirements for the market as a whole? And by this I mean things like the transparency of the accounting system, the breadth and liquidity in the market, the rights of shareholders, the stability of the currency. And it'd be nice if you'd mention a few of these countries. Kind of just a little addendum there is, for the companies in these countries, how relevant do you believe the reconciliation to U.S. GAAP contained in Form 20F really is?
Well, the answer is most of those points you mentioned would be of interest to us. We'd have to rule out anything where the markets aren't big enough. I mean, we are looking to put hundreds of millions of dollars into any single investment at a minimum. Certainly, we think in terms of 500 million as being a minimum. We make exceptions to that. And that's going to rule out a great many companies. Transparency of accounting and accounting rules, we care about that, but we can make adjustments mentally. In some respects, we may think in certain countries accounting is better than here. And so as long as we understand the accounting system, we will be looking toward the same kind of a discount model in our mind of how much cash is this business going to generate over years and how much is going to have to be put into it. And it's the same sort of calculation that goes into our thinking here. And here we don't follow strictly GAAP accounting in our thinking. So the accounting differences would not bother us as long as we understood those accounting differences. The nuances of taxes, the corporate governance that you mentioned could make a difference. If we thought corporate governance was far inferior to here, we'd have to make an adjustment for that fact. But I would say that in most of the major countries, the countries that have stock markets that are big enough so we could take a real position, it's a possibility that we would invest in any of them. We wouldn't rule out, Japan, Germany, France, England, the major markets. Now, it's important to recognize that in all the world's stock markets, something like 53% of the value is in the U.S. market. I mean, here we have 4.5% of the world's population, but 53% of the value of all public is represented with companies in the U.S. market. So we are a big part of the pie, but we're very willing to look at almost all of the rest of the pie as long as we're talking about markets that are big enough to let us put real money into them. Charlie? Well, as we're talking about markets that are big enough to let us put real money into them. Charlie?
Well, we don't have a rule against it. what more can we say?
We can say zone 2.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett. My name is Jean-Philippe Kramers, and I'm coming from London, England. I have a question regarding Coca-Cola. The first part is, are you worried that the earnings of Coca-Cola might continue to be affected by the weakness in the emerging markets and the strength of the dollar over the next few years? And the second part is on the P/E ratio of Coca-Cola at 35 times earnings. Are you worried about the potential rise in interest rates? And is it linked to your views on inflation that you are not worried about the rise in interest rate? Thank you.
Well, in relation to the strength of the dollar, which means that profits in foreign currencies don't translate into as many dollars, we don't have any big feeling on that. I mean, if we had strong feelings about the dollar's behavior vis-a-vis the yen or the euro or the pound or whatever it might be, we could give vent to those views by actually buying or selling large amounts of foreign exchange. We don't know which way the dollar is going to go. So I have nothing in my mind in regard to any decision on buying or selling Coke that would relate to any prediction in my mind about the course of the dollar. The earnings of Coke have been affected by the strength of the dollar in the last few years, particularly the strength against the yen when it went from 80 odd to 140 odd. That was a huge hit in terms of in terms of yen translation into dollars from those profits, and the strength of the dollar generally would hurt. But looking forward, I don't have any prediction on that. It's in Coke's interest to have countries around the world prosperous. I mean, they will benefit from increased prosperity, increased standards of living throughout the world. I think we'll see that over any 10 or 20-year period. I think people's preference for Coke will do nothing but grow, Coca-Cola products. So what I am concerned about is share of market and then what I call share of mind. In other words, what do people think about Coca-Cola now compared to 10 years ago or 20 years ago? What are they going to think about it 10 years from now? Coca-Cola has a marvelous share of mind around the world. Everybody in the world almost has something in their mind about Coca-Cola products, and overwhelmingly it's favorable. You can't, try to think of 3 other companies like it. I can't do it in terms of that ubiquity of good feeling, essentially, about the product. We measure it by unit cases sold and by shares outstanding, and we want a lot more unit cases sold, and we like the idea of fewer shares outstanding over time. I'll be giving you that same answer 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, and I think there'll be a lot more unit cases sold then. It is true that the case growth slowed starting in the second half of last year and continuing through the first quarter of this year. But that's happened from time to time in the past. In my view, that is not it's not an important item. It may be an important item in what the stock does, in a 6-month period or a 1-year period, but we'll be around 10 years from now, and Coca-Cola will be around 10 years from now. And right now we own 8.1 or 2% of Coca-Cola, and we'll probably own a larger percentage 10 years from now because they'll have probably repurchased some stock. The P/E ratio of Coke, like virtually every other leading company in the world, strikes us as, they all strike us as being quite full. That doesn't mean they're going to go down. But it does mean that our enthusiasm for buying more of these wonderful companies is less than it was when the P/E ratios were substantially less. Ideally, those are the kind of companies we want to buy more of over time. We understand their business. This is that there's a reasonable chance, at least, that sometime in the next 10 years we buy more shares of either Coke or Gillette or American Express or some of those other wonderful companies we own. We do not like the P/E ratios generally, but again, I stress that does not mean they're going down. It just means that we got spoiled in terms of how much we got for our money in the past. We got spoiled in terms of how much we got for our money in the past, and we hope that we get spoiled again. Charlie?
Like 10 years out or even further out, you don't really pay much attention to short-term economic developments in this country or that, or currency rates or any other such thing. They don't really help you in making the 10 or 15-year projection, and that's the one we're making. So we have tuned out all this noise in your projection, and that's the one we're making. So we have tuned out all this noise. Tune out the noise, and if you look at the big picture, we think Coke is fine.
It's hard to think of a better business in the world among big businesses. There's obviously companies that are starting from much smaller bases that could grow faster, but it's hard to think of a much more solid business. Zone 3.
Newport Beach, California, Bruce Lindsay, and formerly from Omaha, Nebraska. And I have a question. Some time ago, I read that you were buying silver. I never knew the reason why you were buying silver.
Well, we covered the silver purchase in the 1997 annual report for a special reason. Well, it was part of a group of 3 unconventional investments we made, and one of those investments was of sufficient size so that we felt people ought to know about it specifically. And then we felt our shareholders ought to know that we sometimes do things that they might not have guessed that we would do from reading past annual reports. So we named the 3 unconventional investments. But in this year's report, we have stated that we will not be naming those investments unless one of 2 things happens. One is that they become of a size that you should know about them specifically in order to evaluate the kind of thing we do in Berkshire and the commitment of resources that has been made. Or 2, if regulatory authorities obviously if they require us to report it, we'll report it immediately. Or in the case of silver, a year plus ago, an important regulatory authority indicated that they'd prefer if we report it. We weren't required to do so, and our desire is to cooperate on that anyway, so we did report it. But we stated in this year's report that absent those factors, we will not be giving details on unconventional investments any more than we give any more details on our regular equity holdings than we're more or less required to do. We did say that we had changed certain of the unconventional investments that were described in the previous year's report, and we stated that we had entered into several new ones. So we are in some things that most of you or maybe all of you don't know about, but they aren't of sufficient size so that they're going to in any material way at all affect your investment. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
Zone 4.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett. Wayne Lang from Toronto, Canada. Last year, when you were asked about the year 2000 computer issue, you expressed some concerns about the cost overruns and the federal government readiness. Our 2 countries are in much better shape this year, but could you update us on your current thinking and what concerns you may have about the impact of the lesser readiness internationally on our company's revenues, supply chain, or on the stock market?
Yeah, last year I think I also told you I didn't really consider myself an expert on this, and what I tell you is just what I pick up from being on audit committees or talking to people who are a lot smarter than I am in this sort of area. But that doesn't mean they're right on it, because talking to people who are a lot smarter than I am in this sort of area. But that doesn't mean they're right on it, because my general feeling, and all secondhand, my general feeling is that the part of the world that we have to worry about is in pretty good shape. It's cost a lot of money in various places. It's cost us, some companies, it's cost a terrific amount of money, but I do not think it's going to be a big deal. And I could be wrong, but I'm less worried about it being a big deal today than I was a year ago. And Charlie, do you know anything to add?
No.
Does that mean you think it's going to be less of a big deal than you thought a year ago? Or
No,
you
it
think
means I have nothing to add.
Okay. That's probably what I should have said in the first place. Zone 5.
Good morning. My name is Bob Brewer, and I'm from down the road in Lincoln, Nebraska. I just wanted to ask you how you think the continuing economic turmoil in Japan is likely to affect the global economy and the U.S. stock market over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, Charlie and I are no good on those macro questions, but I would say this. I mean, the Japan problem has been around now in financial markets and banking systems. So it's been around for some time now. So I see no reason why it should have more impact on the rest of the world now than it has had in the last few years. And I would say it's had certainly very little effect on the U.S. in the last few years. And it's no factor in our thinking at all in terms of what we would buy or sell tomorrow morning. I mean, if we got offered a good business tomorrow, unless it was directly involved, I mean, its primary business was in Japan, but if it was a business in this country, that's not something that we would be thinking about. We would be thinking about the specifics of that business. We don't really get too concerned about the things that come and go. I mean, in the end, if we're right about a business over a 10 or 20-year period, just take See's Candy. We bought it in 1972. Look what happened in 1973 and 4, you know, and all the oil shocks and what this country was going through and inflation, all that sort of thing. For us to, let's say in 1972, somebody laid out a roadmap from 1972 to 1982 with the prime rate going to 21.5%, long-term rates going to 15%, and all of the things happening, the Dow going to 570 or whatever, 560, and that wasn't the important thing. The important thing was that this peanut brittle tastes like it does, which is terrific, and that over time we can get a little more money for it. So, you know, See's made $4 million pre-tax in 1972 when we bought it. It made $62 million last year. We don't want to be thinking about the wrong things when we're buying businesses, and that applies to marketable securities just as much as it does as when we're buying 100% of the business. If we're right about the business, the macro factors aren't going to make any difference, you know, and if we're wrong about the business, macro factors are not going to bail us out. Charlie?
Yeah, I think what's interesting in Japan is interesting to one as a citizen. Here's a major industrial country, and they understand all about Keynesian economics and everything else. And when it starts sliding down into a big recession, it just keeps going and going and floundering and staying down, and year follows year, and you take the interest rates down to practically zero and you run a big budget deficit. The economy still stays down. I think this has been very interesting to the economists of the world. I don't think any of them would have predicted that as modern a country as Japan could contract for as long as it did. And I think the cause is related to the extremeness of its booms in both land prices and security prices, and the corruption in its accounting practices and in its regulation of the financial system, including banks. I think it's an interesting lesson for the world of how important it is not to let a lot of slop get into the accounting and regulatory systems, and how a lot of folly in markets doesn't help either.
Sort of fascinating to, you know, people keep saying, well, why doesn't Japan stimulate? Well, they got short-term rates down to 0 and long-term rates at 2%. Well, that would stimulate me, but it's sort of, as Charlie says, it sort of defied a little bit some of the classical Keynesian theory on that. But in the 30s, we had the same problem in this country. We drove interest rates way down and toward the latter half of the 30s.
And I would argue that probably the extreme prosperity in America is related to this so-called wealth effect, with stock markets going up and up. And I think people thought that was a smaller factor than maybe it is.
Zone 6.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Jeff Lilly from Denver, Colorado. My question is as follows. Over the last couple of years, I've read both of you quoted as not following the stock price on a day-to-day basis, not being terribly concerned about whether Berkshire is up or down. You now have analyst coverage. Perhaps you requested it or perhaps you acquiesced to it. But my question is whether this reflects any change in your attention paid to the stock price or your philosophy about investor relations, and whether you think the analyst coverage is going to have any impact on the stock investor relations, and whether you think the analyst coverage is going to have any impact on the stock
price. I mean, we are concerned about building the intrinsic value per share of Berkshire at the highest rate we can, consistent with a couple of other principles that we've set forth. And we hope very much that the stock price stays in a zone that is not too wide around intrinsic value. There's going to be some zone of some sort because intrinsic value itself is not precisely calculable. And in addition, you wouldn't expect it to track it penny for penny. But we don't want it to go crazy in either direction in relation to intrinsic value. When we made the deal with General Re, that attracted more analyst attention and institutional investor attention because General Re's shareholder base was overwhelmingly institutional. So institutions had to decide whether they were going to continue with their investment or clean it out. And we knew we would end up with more institutional ownership subsequently. Alice Schroeder asked me prior to the merger meeting. She said they were a group of institutions that were coming to the meeting, which I liked. I mean, the fact that they were serious enough about their investment to come and see what Berkshire was all about. And a few of them even had a requirement, I think, from their own boards that they at least have sat down with management. So I spent an hour or so with a group that she had put together and that came to Omaha. But that's the last contact I've had with any institutional investor. And we will have no special meetings with institutional investors or anything. I mean, they are absolutely welcome to attend this meeting to get all of the information that's dispensed. I think it's very useful, frankly, to have an analyst or two that is well versed in Berkshire and that thinks straight and does their homework. And that's a plus because it means we don't have to do it. And in effect, that if institutions want to talk to somebody about it, they don't call me because they're not going to have much luck calling me. And they can call Alice or some other analyst that wants to do it. And that's perfect. We have a non-paid. It is not investor relations because that's thought of somebody as sort of pumping your stock. But at least we have an information office now, a non-paid information office. And, that goes along the grain of my nature. And people say, do you want individual owners, you want institutional owners? What we want are informed owners who are in sync with our objectives, our measurements, our time horizons, all of that sort of thing. I mean, we want people that are going to be comfortable owning Berkshire. And we don't want people who are owning it for reasons different, in a way different, that are different from our reasons for owning. We don't want people that are concerned about quarterly earnings. We don't want people who are concerned about stock splits. We don't want people that need to be pumped up about the stock periodically. It's just not of interest to us because it just means we have to keep living that way in the future. And it's not the way we want to live now. It's not the way we want to live in the future. What we really want are a bunch of people like we have in this audience who sit down and read and think and understand that they're making an investment. It's not in this audience. Who sit down and read and think and understand that they're making an investment. They're buying part of a business. They know what the business is all about. They know how we think. They know how we institutional form. And when we get them, we like to keep them. So there's no change in our attitude about that. There is a change in coverage in that there is some limited amount of coverage in Wall Street, which I guess for a company with 110 or 20 billion of market value, there should be. We'll have one more question, then we'll break for lunch. We'll go to zone 7. And after this question, we'll break. We'll come back in about 45 minutes or so. And those of you, as long as we see that everybody's gotten served with food in that time, and any of those who are off-site or with the holiday, I think there are buses. You can also go out and tour the Boeing business jet. We'll sell you as little as 50 hours a year, I believe, on it. So take your wallets at lunchtime. Yeah.
Good morning. My name's Mark Rabanov from Melbourne, Australia. I was wondering if you could help us out with the flight. Mark Rabanov from Melbourne, Australia. I was wondering if you could help us out with the flight operations, which are now a large part of Berkshire. I think we're still putting a lot of together in the annual report. Would help us out with what return on equity you're expecting for each of those divisions.
Yeah, the more capital intensive is the flight safety operation, because every simulator costs real money, and we will add a number of simulators each year. So flight safety, you can look at their figures before we acquired them, and it's reasonable. Figures before we acquired them, and it's reasonable. Flight safety's return on equity is not going to move up or down by a dramatic amount. I mean, our simulator training prices are related to the costs of the simulator, and so there's not going to be way higher returns on equity, nor should there be way lower returns on equity. There is a growth in the equity employed in the business because it is a growing business, and we're training more and more pilots every year. But that'll be a fairly steady thing. The executive jet business is in an earlier part of its development, although it's the leader in its field by far. But we're doing substantial investment spending in a place like Europe, and we'll be doing that on an accelerated pace, if anything. In the end, though, our customers end up owning the planes. So we have an investment in a core fleet of planes which supplements the customer's planes. But by its nature, it's not a capital-intensive business. We are moving around a lot of capital every day. We'll have 140 or so customer planes now, and in aggregate, just to pick a figure, that those planes are certainly worth $1.5 billion or more, and we've got $7 billion of planes on order or some number like that. But we will sell those planes to our customers. So it could be down the line that it will be a business with a very good return on capital. We'll still have an investment in the core fleet, and we'll have some facilities, hangar facilities, and that sort of thing. But our customers will have the big capital investment. I should point out they'll have a whole lot less capital investment if they own their entire plane themselves, so they will be getting a bargain as well. Let's take off for lunch, and I'll see you back here in about 45 minutes, those of you who wish to rejoin us. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to remind you that lunch is being served out of the stands in the outer. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to remind you that lunch is being served out of the stands in the outer. If you're along downstairs, you can try upstairs. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to be ready to go in just a minute if everybody gets their seats. One through eight. One through eight. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We've got 6,000 or 7,000 anyway, sticking around, I think. 6,000 or 7,000 anyway, sticking around, I think. Questions wants to go to the microphone. We're going to start here in just a minute, and we will start. There will only be 8 zones from this point forward because we have everyone in attendance in the main hall. So we will rotate around 8 zones. We'll stay until about 3:30, and we'll start in zone 1.
My name is Charlie Sink. I'm from Lexington, North Carolina, as you can tell by the accent. My question relates to the General Re purchase. I wondered, I've read your letters through the years, and I've been trying to learn a little bit about investing in insurance companies. Did you buy General Re mostly because, I know mostly because of the float, because you think you can grow the float? I know it's not growing significantly now. Or did you buy it because you felt like you could do better with the investments? I've read also you felt like you could do better with the investments. I've read also that you're trying to get a certain amount of investments to equity. Is that something that you focus on? And that's my question.
Yeah, the first 2 parts are correct. We certainly. We don't think the float will grow rapidly in the near-term future at all. The float changed, it actually declined very slightly in the first quarter, and at a level of $6 billion or so of premiums, the paid losses are likely to run at a rate that would cause the float to remain more or less steady. So it will take a period when premiums grow for the float to grow. And the premiums would have to grow fairly substantially to have any significant impact on the float. And like I say, that will not happen in the short term. We expect the float to grow over the longer term. We expect that General Re will probably grow considerably faster in international markets than the domestic market. We think that their reputation, which was as good as could be found from an operational standpoint, from a technical standpoint, a managerial standpoint, will be further enhanced by Berkshire's capital strength. So we think their reputation is likely to grow over the years, and we think the premium volume will follow, but not in any major way at all. For a few years at least. And then we, as addressed earlier in the meeting, we think there is the opportunity to do better with that float from time to time in the future, but right now that is not a plus that it's in our hands, and it may not be a plus a year from now. We think at some point it will be a plus. We also pointed out that there could be some tax advantages to be included as part of Berkshire as well. So there are some things going for it, but none of them they will not have an impact in 1999, and they may well not have an impact in 2000. We obviously think Berkshire 10 years from now will be worth more on a per share basis with General Re included than if we had not made the deal. We don't necessarily think that's the case on a 1-year or 2-year basis, but it is our judgment on a 10-year basis.
I would say that if we in the future do as 1/3 as well with the new float that came to us with General Re as we've done on average in the past, it will work wonderfully. If you take our past use of float in the history of this company, it would be an interesting study if anybody ever stretched it out.
Zone 2.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Kaza from Oakland County, Michigan. I'd like to thank both of you gentlemen for your hospitality this weekend. My question deals with price deflation. Could you please explain how technological advances and productivity increases are affecting our non-fixed fixed income holdings, especially insurance?
Well, I think that to the extent your question implies the question, how has technology affected the inflation rate, the advances in technology, I've heard Alan Greenspan make a lot of interesting comments on that. I think it baffles him to some extent, but he also recognizes that there's some important, very hard to measure factor that has caused inflation not to behave in the way that most people expected with this drop of employment, general prosperity, etc. And I think he attributes it in some part, but again immeasurable, to what has been happening in the information technology world. Obviously, low inflation is good for fixed income investments, but that's been reflected to a significant degree in a long-term rate that's at about 5.5% now. It does look at the moment like an almost perfect world in terms of the macroeconomic factors, and that probably is a reason why people are enthused about stocks, and it's a reason, and it's a good reason in terms of price inflation. It's a good reason why bonds have behaved well over the last, really, since 1982. I don't know the answers to what it means for the future. I have to believe that it's very good for this country to have the lead in information technology that it does for this country, to have the lead in information technology that it does. I mean, it seems to me as a non-expert that we are so far ahead, and the money flowing into it, the brain power flowing into it, that it's hard to think of who's in second place, and I think that's helped this country in some very significant way, but I don't know how to measure it. Charlie?
Well, I would say that Berkshire's businesses, on average, are less likely to be obsoleted by new technology than businesses generally. No steel-toed work shoes. I do not anticipate a significant change in the technology. And I think we have more of the stuff that's sort of basic and hard to obsolete than many other corporations do.
Yeah, as we mentioned in the report, we think all of that activity is very beneficial from a societal standpoint. Our own emphasis is on trying to find businesses that are predictable in a general way as to where they'll be in 10 or 15 or 20 years. And that means we're looking for businesses that, in general, are not going to be susceptible to very much change. We view change as more of a threat into the investment process than an opportunity. That's quite contrary to the way most people are looking at equities now. But we do not get enthused about, with a few exceptions, we do not get enthused about change as a way to make a lot of money. We try to we're looking for the absence of change to protect ways that are already making a lot of money and allow them to make even more in the future. So we look at change as a threat, and whenever we look at a business and we see lots of change coming, 9 times out of 10 we're going to pass on that. And when we see something we think is very likely to look the same 10 years from now, we feel much more confident about predicting it. I mean, Coca-Cola is still selling a product that is very, very similar to one that was sold 10 plus years ago, and the fundamentals of distribution and talking to the consumer and all of that sort of thing really haven't changed at all. Your analysis of Coca-Cola 50 years ago can pretty well serve as an analysis now. We're more comfortable in those kind of businesses. It means we miss a lot of very big winners, but we wouldn't know how to pick those out anyway. It doesn't mean also that we have very few big losers, and that's quite helpful over time.
Yeah, the peanut brittle has very little technological change too.
They better not change it. We like it just the way it is. Zone 3.
My name is Esther Wilson. I live in South Sioux City, Nebraska. My husband and I will have some new money in the early 80s of our lifehood. We have a daughter 50 years old who will inherit anything we have. My question is I also have a 4% interest on a mutual fund that is non-taxable. Are there any better ways to invest our money?
Well, those are tough questions. I mean, I run into friends of mine all the time where they come into a lump sum at a given time, Charlie and I do not have great answers about investing sums of money for people who are not really active in the process. I mean, as we said earlier, if we were working with small sums now, we would start looking at a whole bunch of very small situations and some things that we might know how to do on a small scale. But for the average investor who wants to own equities over a 20 or 30-year period, we think regular investment in some kind of very low-cost pool of money, which might well be an index fund, probably makes as much sense as anything. But it's important to keep the costs down. I have close to 100% of my net worth in Berkshire. I'm comfortable with it because I like the businesses we own. But I didn't buy it at this price either, so I don't like to go. I never recommend anybody buy or sell it. And Charlie, do you recommend anything?
I think if there's anybody in the room who thinks it would be very easy to come up with a one-liner for a great no-brainer investment tomorrow with a great slug of new money, I wish they'd come up and tell me what it is. We don't have any solution to that one. It's harder for us now than it has been at other times.
Yeah, there's been a couple of times. In 1974, there was something in Forbes, and 69, the reverse of that situation, and then I think I wrote an article for Forbes, I can't remember exactly when it was, about how equities almost had to be more attractive than bonds at that time, and bonds weren't that unattractive. I mean, every now and then you can say you are getting a great deal for your money in equities, or sometimes you can say you're getting a great deal for your money in fixed income investments. You can't say that now, so what do you do? In terms of new money, we find ourselves sitting and waiting for something, and we continue to look. But we are forced to look at bigger ideas. So if we were working with smaller funds, we'd be much more likely to find something than we are in our present situation. As Charlie says, we really don't have any great one-line advice on it. I wish we did. Zone 4, go ahead.
The real long-term rate of return from saving money and investing it has to go down from recent experience in America, particularly equity-related recent experience. The wealth of the world can't increase at the kind of rates that people are used to in the American equity markets, and the American equity markets can't hugely outperform the growth of the wealth of the world forever. We ought to have reduced expectations regarding the future generally.
Because, we mentioned earlier 53% of the world's stock market value is in the U.S. Well, if U.S. GDP grows at 4%, 5% a year with 1 or 2% inflation, which would be a very good result. I think it's very unlikely that corporate profits are going to grow at a greater rate than that. Corporate profits as a percent of GDP are on the high side already, and you can't constantly have corporate profits grow at a faster rate than GDP. And obviously, in the end, they'd be greater than GDP. And it's like somebody said that New York has more lawyers than people. I mean, there's certain, you run into certain conflicts in the terminology as you go along if you say profits can get bigger than GDP. So if you really have a situation where the best you can hope for in corporate profit growth over the years is 4 or 5%, how can it be reasonable to think that equities, which are a capitalization of that corporate profits, can grow at 15% a year? I mean, it is nonsense, frankly. And people are not going to average 15% or anything like it in equities. And I would almost defy them to show me mathematically how it can be done in aggregate. I looked the other day at the Fortune 500. They earned $334 billion on and had a market cap of $9.9 trillion at the end of the year, which would probably be at least $10.5 trillion now. Well, the only money investors are going to make in the long run are what the businesses make. I mean, there is nothing added. The government doesn't throw in anything. You know, nobody's adding to the pot. People are taking out from the pot in terms of frictional costs, investment management fees, brokerage commissions, and all of that. But the $334 million is all the investment earns. I mean, if you own a farm, what the farm produces is all you're going to get from the farm. If it produces, $50 an acre of net profit, you get $50 an acre of net profit. And there's nothing about it that transforms that in some miraculous form. If you own all of if you own all of the Fortune 500 now, if you owned 100% of us, you would be making $334 billion. And if you pay $10.5 trillion for that, that is not a great return on an investment. And then you say to yourself, can that double in 5 years? It can't, the $334 billion. It can't double in 5 years with GDP growing at 4% a year or some number like that. It would just produce things that are so out of whack in terms of experience in the American economy. It won't happen. So anytime you get involved in these things where if you trace out the mathematics of it, you bump into absurdities, then you better change expectations somewhat. Charlie?
Well, there are two great sayings. One is, if a thing can't go on forever, it will eventually stop. And the other I borrow from my friend Fred Stanback, who I think is here. People who expect perpetual growth in real wealth in a finite earth are either madmen or economists.
Zone 4, please.
Good evening. My name is Shru Gui Chen. I'm from Des Moines, Iowa. While we have been discussing of how much return that the company has helped us to get in the past few years and for the future too, though I believe there are many people who are concerned about how much have we given to the society in return. And gentlemen, would you please share with us about your philosophy and the company policies and how much the Berkshire has done in terms of philanthropy and charities? Thank you.
Yes, there are figures in the annual report that bear on that. One thing we did wasn't entirely voluntary, is that I think we gave about $2.6 billion to the federal government last year in income taxes. I'm not sure. I looked at General Electric and Microsoft and a couple of the largest companies. We may have paid more in federal income tax than any other U.S. company. Don't take my word for that, because it could be Walmart paid more. I wouldn't be surprised if Walmart paid more. But I did look at a couple of the big, more than GE or Microsoft, both of which have market caps that are 3 times our size. And shareholder designated contribution program was 18 or so million, as I remember, and then we detailed the contributions in the report made by the other companies. But I would argue that to the extent that GEICO, for example, is a more efficient way of delivering personal auto insurance than overwhelmingly than its competitors are, and that if 15% is a fair indication of how much it is saving people, that on a $4 billion of premium volume, that there is something more than $600 million that consumers save by a more efficient way of distribution, which has been honed to a fine art by the GEICO management. And really delivering the goods and services that people want in an economical way is a very important part, I think, of the contribution that any company makes to society, as well as the taxes they pay and their actual corporate philanthropy. We are not big believers in giving away the money of the owner of Berkshire, acting as their representatives and giving away their money to philanthropy. We think that the shareholders should, it's their money. And if we had a partnership of 10 people, if I were the managing partner, I would not feel I should make the decisions on philanthropy for the other 9 people. I would let them all make their own decisions. We do not think that corporations generally should be passing out money to the pet charities of the CEO, and we don't do it at Berkshire, but we do let the shareholders make those designations. And as I say, I think our primary thank you. I think the best contribution actually we can make to society over 10 or 15 years is finding ways to deliver goods and services that people want to them at lower cost than the alternatives that were previously available to them. Charlie?
Yeah, well, I applaud the questioner's yearning for an answer to the question of isn't there something more in this game than making and piling up money, and shouldn't we be thinking about what we owe in return and what's going to go back in return? In the Munger case, I think 100% is going to go back in return for a reason different from that in the Buffett case. You know, there's an old saying, how much did old Charlie leave? And the answer is, I believe he left it all. And in essence, it all has to go back one way or another. You can't take it with you. That's the iron rule of the game. And I do think it's important to think about what you do for other people and what example do you set with your own life or your own corporate life. And I do think that Berkshire stacks up pretty well in that respect. And in due course, when we get into gargantuan charities bearing the name Buffett, my guess is that'll be done pretty well too. This is likely to be a pretty good run.
Zone 5.
Hi, my name is Michael from New York. First, I'd like to address Mr. Munger. Mr. Munger, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, as well as Mr. Buffett. And if you could just say hi to my wife for a second. Her name is Jane. Next, I understand your secrecy on unconventional investments, but Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, could you please tell me your insight on market conditions for oil and silver?
He asked you, Charlie.
We've already said that we're not going to comment about commodity investments. I will cheat a little on that. Eventually, the price of oil has to go way up. That doesn't take any money from buying it now, counting the interest factor.
Zone 6. Fortunately, I don't really, I listened carefully when he phrased his question. He said insights, and I don't have any insights, so we'll go to zone 6.
My name is Merritt Belle-Isle from Austin, Texas, and the company has a large investment in the Washington Post Company, which has many cable television systems serving non-major metropolitan areas, as well as a recent investment in TCA Cable. And so I was hoping to get a comment about the cable television business generally. And the other question is about your philosophy of children handling money and inheriting money.
The first question about cable, the Washington Post Company does have, we own about 17 or so % of the Washington Post Company, and I believe they have 700,000 plus homes. And as you say, they're in largely in smaller areas. It's been a good business, and as you know, cable prices have been galloping here in the last year or thereabouts. From the standpoint of the Post, that's bad news because the Post would have been a net buyer of cable and will not be a seller. And it's really very much like our attitude towards stocks and stock prices. It is not good news for the Washington Post Company when cable towards stocks and stock prices. It is not good news for the Washington Post Company when cable investing funds. It's going to be a generator of funds over cable. It's way better off if cable prices go down than up. The TCA is not. Lou Simpson runs a separate portfolio at Geico, equity portfolios. So I've never read an annual report of the TCA Cable. I know nothing about it. If he still has it, it's an investment of Lou's at Geico, for Geico, and it's not something that falls under my management at all. That's a point I should mention because periodically the press picks up some item that says that Berkshire, or sometimes it says that I am buying X, Y, or Z. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it isn't true because filings are made on behalf of various other entities that are associated with us. And I don't know anything about them. I saw one here a couple of weeks ago reporting that I don't know whether it was me or Berkshire, I think it was me personally, it was buying some real estate investment trust with the name Omega in it. I'd never heard of it. But that story appeared various places. Well, I can assure you I filed no form with the federal government that said that I was buying that stock, although you would have deduced that from certain press accounts. But various other entities, I think that there may be a subsidiary of General Re, New England Asset Management, that may have to report periodically on what they do. And since General Re is owned by Berkshire and New England Asset Management's a part of General Re, who knows what they pick up on that. So I do caution you generally to be a little careful about reports as to what is being bought or sold by me or by Berkshire Hathaway. Now, as I remember, there was a second question that I didn't like quite as well to answer. Charlie, you want to tackle that one?
Well, I think there was more interest in the future of cable. That is, we have demonstrated a signal lack of aptitude in correctly diagnosing the future of cable in a way that made us a lot of money. And we've done that in spite of the fact that in retrospect it seems like a lot that was perfectly obvious was lying around.
To date, cable has not, cable has been here for, 30 years or so. Cable has not made extraordinary returns on invested capital at all. But it's always had the promise of greater returns and extraordinary returns on invested capital at all. But it's always had the promise of greater returns, and it wouldn't have to keep investing money in it the way you have had to date. Returns will be made in cable relative to invested capital, not relative to purchase price of them, but relative to invested capital in the property itself. And as I say, that has not really been the case. It's been the case with cable programming. Cable programming, there has been a lot of money made in relation to capital investment. But in terms of the actual investment in cable facilities, the capital investment has been such, the expenditures in developing systems have been such, that the returns so far have not been great. But the prices for cable systems now would indicate that people think that those returns are finally going to start flowing in a big way. What was the second part of that question that you had? Oh, inherited wealth and children, yeah.
Kids inheriting money.
Yeah, well, we have a minority viewpoint down here in the front row. I think my views on that subject changed when I was about 18. Until that point, I thought it would have been a great idea. No, I am quite a believer in a meritocracy, and I think a part of that is not having people start way ahead of other people in life based on whether they were lucky enough to come from the right womb or not. So I've never been big on the idea that either society benefited or in many cases the kids, although I think that's much more problematic. But by the fact that great transfers of wealth will go from one generation to another. I would rather see the degree of talent possessed by individuals determine the resources they command in this world and their ability to influence other people's lives and command the labor of other people and all of that than any divine right of the womb. So it's and Charlie has a somewhat different view on that.
Yeah, I am a little more willing to let the world take the succeeding generations down. It's
He believes in
I don't
passing
think they need much help.
Charlie believes in passing it along as long as you're sure they're going to blow it. Okay, so go ahead.
If you stop to think, Warren, of the great fortunes of yore, if you go back to 1900, 1870, and name me the people that have vast power because they are in the fourth generation in that family. Some of them are living awfully well, but they are not running the world.
I would say the Rockefeller family had considerably more influence than if their name had been, just plain Rock.
Well, I think that's true, but you're picking probably the strongest single family of the piece. And now that it's dispersed among 60 or 70 or 80 Rockefeller, I think it's true there were 4 or 5 brothers there that had an unusual share of worldly influence. I must say in that case, I think they handled it very well.
Zone 7.
My name is Alan Nagin from Reston, Virginia. I know you like to buy into success stories, but you don't like to buy high tech. And it seems to me, say, in the case of Microsoft, that 10 years from now, they'll be doing software development, just like 10 years from now, Coke will be selling sugared water. And what I'm wondering is why you feel that way when it seems certain companies, high-tech companies, are predictable. And it also seems that in the early 90s, you mentioned you were going to buy a pharmaceutical company, which also seems like high-tech to me. So that's my question.
Yeah, well, I think we said that with the pharmaceutical companies, we wouldn't have known how to pick out which one. We would have thought the industry as a group would do well. From those levels of 1993, you cannot buy high-tech companies at anything like at levels that are commensurate with the levels that the pharmaceutical companies were selling at in 93. I would, and getting to the first part of your question, I think it's much easier to predict the relative strength that Coke will enjoy in the soft drink world than the amount of strength that Microsoft will possess in the software world. That's not to knock Microsoft at all. If I had to bet on anybody, I'd certainly bet on Microsoft, bet heavily if I had to bet, but I don't have to bet. And I don't see that world as clearly as I see the soft drink world. Now, somebody that has a lot of familiarity with software may very well see it that way, and they're entitled to, if it's true they have superior knowledge and they act on it, they're entitled to make money from that superior knowledge. There's nothing wrong with that. I know I don't have that kind of knowledge, and I simply think, and I do think that if you have a general knowledge of business over decades, that you would regard the industry they're in as less predictable than the soft drink industry. Now, it may also be that even though it's less predictable, that there's a whole lot more money to be made, so that if you're right, that the payoff is much larger. But we are perfectly willing to trade away a big payoff for a certain payoff, and that's the way we're put together. It does not knock the ability of other people to make those decisions. I mean, I asked, first time I met Bill Gates in 1991, I said, if you're going to go away on a desert island for 10 years, you had to put your stock in 2 companies in the high-tech business, which would they be? And he named 2 very good stocks. And if I'd bought both of them, we'd have made a lot more money than we made even buying Coca-Cola. But he also would have said at the same time that if he went away, he'd rather buy Coca-Cola, because he would have felt sure about that happening. It's, different people understand different businesses, and the important thing is to know which ones you do understand and when you're operating within what I call your circle of competence. And the software business is not within my circle of competence, and I don't think it's within Charlie's. Charlie?
Well, I certainly agree with that. I think there are interesting questions, too, about how far the whole field can go. Take jet airplane travel below the speed of sound. It's been pretty static in terms of the technology for a long, long time. The big Boeing airliner is much the same as it was 20 or 30 years ago. And I think a lot of these businesses are quite dependent on the technology continuing to gallop and do more and more for people. Take pharmaceuticals. If they never invented any more pharmaceuticals, it would be a terrible business. And I don't know what happens once you get unlimited bandwidth into the house and way more options. And beyond a certain point, it strikes me that there might be a surfeit of anybody's interest in the field. I don't know where that point is, whether it's 20 years out or 30 years out, but it would affect me a little.
The dilly bar is more certain to be here in 10 years than any software application that we know. But that's maybe because we understand dilly bars and not software. In the whole United States, which is by far the most prosperous country in the world, the whole United States, there are probably around 400 companies, 400 total companies that are earning $200 million a year after tax. Of those 400, you can name them. I mean, you can start, if you say banks, you can say Citigroup and Chase and Wells Fargo, and you can name 10 or 15 of them. And if you name consumer goods, you can say Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola and Gillette, and you can name a whole bunch of them. You can almost, of those 400, you can probably name 350. If 5 years from now, instead of 400 being on that list, there'll probably be 450 on the list, maybe 475. A lot of those will be companies that are earning between $150 and $200 million now. So there'll probably be 20, some number like 20, that call it come from nowhere. Now, if you look at the number of companies that are selling today at a price which implies 200 million or more of earnings right today, you will find dozens and dozens in the high-tech arena. And a very large percentage of those companies are not going to fulfill people's expectations. I can't tell you which ones, but I know there won't be dozens and dozens and dozens of those companies make a couple $100 million a year, and I know they are now selling at prices that require them to be making that much money or more. It just doesn't happen that often. Biotech was all the rage some years back. How many of those companies are making a couple $100 million a year? It just doesn't happen. It's not that easy to make lots of money in a business in a capitalistic society. There are people that are looking at what you're doing every day and trying to figure out a way to do it better and to, underprice you or bring out a better product or whatever it may be. And a few companies make it. But here in the United States, after all of these decades and decades and decades of wonderful economic development, we've got about 400 companies that have hit the level that would be required of a company that would have a market cap of $3 billion. And some companies are getting $3 billion of market cap the day they come out, virtually. So you want to think about the math of all this. Zone 8.
Hello, my name is Larry Widman from Minot, North Dakota. You've already hinted about Coke and Gillette's current valuations and also about their great prospects for the future. But in the past year, both stocks have been down 30 to 50% from their highs. How much farther would they have had to fall before your criteria of margin of safety been satisfied and allowed you to purchase more shares? And two, has the Disney Cap Cities merger gone as well as you would have hoped? And has the future prospects of Disney changed in your opinion?
First question, that's a good question on Coke and Gillette, because obviously we think about the businesses that we're the most familiar with and where we're committed. That neither one of those businesses got to the price that left us happy putting new money in, but we're quite happy, very happy owning those businesses, and we'll be happy owning them for a very long time to come. But it's some evidence of where the market has been and is, that even when they ran into some tougher business conditions than they anticipated, that their stocks did not get down to the prices that caused us to get excited about them. Charlie, you want to comment on that, or the second part?
No, but I do want to remind people that the Dilly Bar is a Dairy Queen product.
And they are good, I can tell you that.
I wouldn't want the shareholders to believe that the commercial standards of this operation are faltering. Generally speaking, trying to dance in and out of the companies you really love on a long-term basis has not been a good idea for most investors. And we're quite content to sit with our best holdings.
People have tried to do that with Berkshire over the years, and I've had some friends that thought it was getting a little ahead of itself from time to time, and they thought they'd sell and buy it back cheaper and everything. It's pretty tough to do. You have to make two decisions right. You have to sell it right first, and then you have to buy it right later on, and usually you have to pay some tax in between them. If you get into a wonderful business, best thing to do is to stick with it. Coke and Gillette both experienced disappointments to their management below what they anticipated a year and a half ago, or whenever it was, and below what we anticipated. But that will happen over time. It happens with some of our wholly owned businesses from time to time. Sometimes they do better than we anticipate too. But it's not the nature that everything goes in a nice, straight, smooth line upward. You mentioned Cap Cities. Parts of Cap Cities have done extraordinarily well, for example. But in the network business, if you go back 30 years and look at what network has been on top, you find that no one stays on top or on the bottom indefinitely. It's a competitive world, as I mentioned earlier, and sometimes your competitors' correct moves, your own incorrect moves, the world environment, all of those things can interrupt trend lines. I see nothing that's happened in the last year in terms of the long-term trend line of the blade and razor business, which is the one I referred to as inevitable at Gillette. I mean, there are other businesses that are not in the same category as the blade and razor business. Coke, fortunately, has virtually its entire business in soft drinks, and so it comprises almost 100% of the whole there. But I see nothing that would change the long-term future of either the blade and razor business or Coke's position in the soft drink business. Number one.
Steve Cohn from Peoria, Illinois. First of all, I just had my first dilly bar a half an hour ago, and thank you for introducing me to that.
Good. They'll sell you a second, too. If
You spoke earlier about the threat of change. Can you comment on the threat of deflation, and if it were to occur, what its likely impact would be on the economy, Berkshire Hathaway, and personal investment decisions?
Well, now, displacement in what respect?
Inflation.
Oh, inflation.
Deflation.
Oh, deflation.
Deflation.
Oh, I'm getting there. Well, I think it's very, very unlikely, but I have been wrong consistently now for a decade or more about the degree to which inflation has at least been tamed for that period. I would have expected, if you'd showed me all the other things that were going to happen in the world in the last if I'd seen that ahead of time 10 or 15 years ago, I would have thought we would have had more inflation. So I have trouble envisioning a world of where the U.S. experiences deflation. But, my record is not great on that. And again, we do not spend a lot of time thinking about macro factors. I mean, if you ran into deflation, that means capital is appreciating. So you need much lower nominal rates of return on capital to be in the same place under deflation as would be the case if you had inflationary conditions. So deflation, everything being equal, and it isn't equal, is good for investors because the value of money appreciates, the buying power of money appreciates, but it would have other consequences too. I don't think it's likely. I have no great record at all in macro forecasting, and if it does happen, the truth is I don't know what the effects would be. Charlie?
Well, you've seen what deflation is doing in Japan, and it's been quite unpleasant for the people there. On the other hand, it hasn't been a catastrophe. I mean, nothing like the 30s in the United States.
No, and actually in Japan, if you'd owned long bonds, you would have had a tremendous bonanza from deflation because the value of your bonds would have gone up dramatically as interest rates came down, and then that money in turn would buy more. So it was a very, if you happen to be the person that owned longer bonds issued at higher coupons some years back, that's worked to your advantage. And presumably that would work in this country. If we actually ran into consistent deflation, my guess is that people who owned long bonds, even bought at 5.5%, would find their position in the world dramatically improved compared to people who own most other asset classes. Zone 2.
Hello. I'm Murray Cass from Markham, Ontario. First off, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, I'd like to thank you for being so generous with your time every year at these meetings. Mr. Buffett, many in the academic community call you lucky or a statistical outlier. Mr. Munger, I'm not sure what they call you.
Well, you're free to speculate on what they call him.
I know you don't like to forecast the equity markets, but maybe you would dare to forecast the evolution of the debate between proponents of the efficient market theory and value investors. Do you think there will ever be a reconciliation? And I'm talking especially about what's taught at the business schools. And as an addendum, are your designated successors, are they outliers as well?
Well, we like to think they are, and they may be more outliers than we are. The market is generally, to me, it's almost self-evident if you've been around markets for any length of time that the market is generally fairly efficient. It's fairly efficient as pricing between asset classes. It's fairly efficient in terms of evaluating specific businesses. But being fairly efficient does not suffice to support an efficient market theory approach to investing or to all of the shoots that have come off of that in the academic world. So if you'd believed in efficient market theory and been taught that and adopted it for your own 20 or 30 years ago or 10 years ago, I think it probably hit its peak about 20 years ago. You know, it would have been a terrible, terrible mistake. It would have been like learning the earth is flat. It just, you'd have had the wrong start in life. Now, it became terribly popular in the academic world. It almost became a required belief in order to hold a position. It was what was taught in all the advanced courses, and a mathematical theory that involved other investment questions was built around it, so that if you went to the center of it and destroyed that part of it, it really meant that people who'd spent years and years and years getting PhDs found their whole world crashing around them. I would say that it's I would say that it's been discredited in a fairly significant way over the last decade or two. I mean, you don't hear people talking the same way about it as you did 15 or 20 years ago. But the market generally is fairly efficient in most ways. I mean, it's hard to find securities that are inefficiently priced. There are times when it's relatively easy, but right now, for example, it's difficult. I don't know exactly how much it's holy writ still in business schools. I certainly get the impression as I go around talking to business schools that it is far less regarded as you know, sort of unquestioned dogma that like it was 15 or 20 years ago. The University of Florida now has some courses in valuing businesses. University of Missouri is putting in one, and I think the high priests of efficient market theory are probably not in the same demand for speaking engagements and seminars and all of that as they were a decade or two ago. It's hard, though, it's very interesting. It's hard to dislodge a belief that becomes sort of becomes the dogma of a finance department. It's so challenging to them, and you know, they have to, at age 30 or 40, to go back and say what I've learned up to this point and what I've been teaching students and all of that is silly. That doesn't come easy to people. Charlie?
Well, you know, Max Planck, the great physicist, said that even in physics, the old guard really didn't accept the new ideas. The new ideas prevail in due course because the old guard fades away clinging to the asininities of the past. And that's what's happened to the hard form efficient market theorists. They're an embarrassment to the scene, and they will soon be gone. On the people who think the market is reasonably efficient or roughly efficient, of course, are absolutely correct, and that will stay with us for the long pull.
Thinking it's roughly efficient, though, does nothing for you in academia. You can't build anything around it. I mean, what people want are what they call elegant theories, and it doesn't work. You know, what investment is about is valuing businesses. I mean, that is all there is to investment. You sit around and you try to figure out what a business is worth, and if it's selling below that figure, you buy it. That, to my, you can't find a course virtually in the country on how to value businesses. You can find all kinds of courses on how to compute beta or whatever it may be, because that's something the instructor knows how to do, but he doesn't know how to value a business. So the important subject doesn't get taught, and it's tough to teach. I think Ben Graham did a good job of teaching it at Columbia, and I was very fortunate to run into him many decades ago. But if you take the average PhD in finance and ask him to value a business, he's got a problem. And if he can't value it, I don't know how he can invest in it. So therefore, it's much easier to take up efficient market theory and say it doesn't make any difference because everybody knows everything about it anyway. And there's no sense in trying to think about valuing businesses, that the market's efficient, it's valued them all perfectly. About on the second day in that course. I mean, you walk in, you say, everything's valued perfectly, and class dismissed. So it puzzles me, but I encourage you to look for the inefficiently priced. Zone 3. Berkshire, incidentally, was inefficiently priced for a long time. And it wasn't on the radar screen. If you'd asked an academic how to value it, they wouldn't have known what to look at exactly. Yep.
My name is Ken.
They wouldn't have known what to look at exactly. Yep.
My name is Ken Shubin. You've taught us that a key concept of Berkshire is the amount of float it has, the cost of the float, and how fast it grows. Can you please help us understand currently what amount of float Berkshire has and what the goals are in the future for that growth rate over a sort of 1 to 2 decade period, understanding that it'll be a lumpy advance? Because looking at the historical data you've provided us for Genray and Berkshire regarding the amount of float and its cost, it's grown at a great rate, high teens, low 20s. And if you could please comment on the future expectations we should have, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, it's an important question, but I don't know how to give you a good answer. It's grown at a much faster rate since 1967 when we went in the insurance business than I thought it would. I mean, I didn't anticipate it would grow that way. I didn't anticipate necessarily we'd get a chance to buy Geico. I didn't necessarily know we'd ever acquire a General Re. So it's been very hard to forecast. What we've tried to do is grow cheap float as fast as we could. And sometimes it's been easy, sometimes it's been impossible. But I don't know, if you'd asked me that question 30 years ago, I'd have given you an answer that really hasn't proven out very well. And so I don't know how to give you the answer now except to tell you this. It's very much a goal of Berkshire to grow that float at as fast as it can while maintaining a very low cost to it. And again, you mentioned it'd be lumpy. Well, it'll be lumpy on cost, it'll be lumpy on growth rate. But I mean, it's something we think about all of the time in both our operating decisions and perhaps some big capital commitment decision. We know that if we can solve that problem of how to grow it with it costing us relatively little, that we will make Berkshire a whole lot more valuable in the process. And people, I mean, we always laid out the facts as to what we were doing, but people basically seem to ignore that, and we have had this growth rate which we can't maintain. The numbers are too big. But it's something that Charlie and I think about all the time. We've got some good vehicles for growing it, but we don't have any vehicles that will grow it in aggregate at anything like the rate it's been growing in the past. So we may get a chance to do something that adds to our ability to do it. If we get a chance and it's at the right price, we'll add it. If we won't, we'll do as much as we can internally. But the question you ask, the growth in intrinsic value of Berkshire over the next 10 years will be determined in a very significant way by the rate at which we do grow it, and also the added fact of what it costs us to achieve that float. Charlie?
Yeah, if we grow very low-cost float at the same rate that it's grown in the past for another 30 years, you can be confident of one thing. If you look to the heavens, there'll be a star in the east.
Zone 4.
I'm David Levy from Newport Beach, California. Berkshire has been investing in the property and casualty and reinsurance business. I notice, except for annuities, you've been avoiding the life insurance business. Do you anticipate investing in the life insurance business? Also, I have a second question, and that is the relationship of Berkshire A and Berkshire B. Last year, there was a slight premium for Berkshire B over Berkshire A. About now, Berkshire is selling at about a 3 to 4% discount. I also notice that certain people are shorting Berkshire A and Berkshire B. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Sure. On the life business, we have no bias against the life business. We are in the life reinsurance business in a fairly significant way through General Re. As you mentioned, we've done a little on annuities. The problem with the life business is that it isn't very profitable. And you can look at the records of the big companies on that, and that a lot of the activity in the area is in some way equity related. And Charlie and I have never wanted to get in the business of managing equities for other people. I mean, we want our sole interest on equities to be Berkshire Hathaway itself. So we do not want to wear two hats. We would never go in the mutual fund management business or any kind of investment management business, because if we were to be managing $20 or $30 billion in the investment management business, and we get a good idea that we can put $1 billion in, whose money do we put in it? So we'd rather just be wearing one hat, and that we want that hat to be Berkshire Hathaway, and we don't want to be promising other people that for us, half of 1% or 1% fee that they're going to get our best ideas, because those ideas belong to Berkshire, and we'd be misleading people if we promised otherwise. So anything that involves an equity component to it, and that's a big part of what's going on in the life business now. It's just something we wouldn't be comfortable being involved with. If you look at term life insurance, we've looked at that in terms of putting it on the internet. It is priced at rates that we find very hard, even with the absence of commissions, to make sense. But it's a business we understand, so we'd be perfectly willing to be in the life insurance business if we had a way of doing it where we thought there was reasonable profitability attached to it. Charlie, do you want to comment on the life business before I get to the A versus B thing? Or?
No. We do those structured settlements. That is sort of like the annuity business. And the life business we're doing is mostly annuities and on a very low-cost basis.
Yeah, anyone that wants to buy a non-equity related annuity should go to our website and find, in terms of the waiting for the safety of the product and everything, you will find a very, very competitive product, because it's a low-cost operation, and if you're buying it to get paid 30 years from now, you are certain to get paid from Berkshire, and you're not necessarily certain to get paid from various other entities. So we've got a very competitive product there, but it's not a big business. On the question of the A versus B, I've written something. I wrote it some months ago and stuck it up on the website regarding my own thoughts on that. Obviously, the most the B can be worth is 1/30th of the A, because you can always convert an A into 30 shares of B. The B may sell a slight bit above that 1/30th price before it gets to a level where it induces arbitrage between the two. So it can theoretically sell, and it will sell, a fraction of a percent above 1/30th of the price of the A. But if it gets above that, I'll buy the A and sell you the B. There's an arbitrage profit to be made, and probably the way markets work, most of that profit will be captured by the specialist, because he's in the best position to effectuate trades of that sort. But the B can never be worth more than 1/30th of the A, and it can never sell for more than slightly above 1/30th of the A. On the other hand, B is not convertible into A stock, so it can sell at a discount. I put on the web some months ago that I thought that, just my opinion, but I thought that when the B is selling for more than a 2% discount, I personally would rather buy B than A under those circumstances. If it's selling for the same price as the A, 1/30th the price of the A, but if it's selling on a parity basis, and I were buying 30 shares or more of B, I would rather buy A, because you can always go one direction and you can't go the other direction. If you take the next 10 years, I would think that a fair percentage of the time it's going to be selling right about 1/30th of the price of the A, and there'll be periods of time when it sells at a modest discount. And I would say that when it gets in the 3 to 4% range, I regard that as quite a wide discount. If I didn't have a tax to pay myself, I might sell A and buy B if I was getting 4% more in the economic equivalent on B. It's not practical for me to do it. I know of some tax-exempt investors that have actually done that sort of thing. And long range, we will always treat the B exactly as we laid it out in the prospectus. There are two differences between the A and B. One is in the voting power relatively, and the other is in the shareholder designated contributions program. And otherwise, in all respects, B will be treated on the same basis as the A. We have no, even though Charlie and I own a lot of A and we don't own any B to speak of, we regard the B shareholders as being 100% on a parity, except for those two differences we laid out at the time of issuance with A shareholders. We would never, there won't be a deal ever made for Berkshire anyway, but if there would be, we would always treat the A and B on a 1 for 30 basis. We would not. We've been in situations where people haven't done that, and we've never been very happy with it. So we would always treat people proportionally. Charlie?
Well, I certainly agree with all of that.
The question about shorting, it doesn't make any difference whether anybody shorts any stock or not, really. I mean, if you were arbitraging between A and B, and the B was selling a little higher than the A, you might be buying some A and shorting some B, and you might delay conversion because you might figure the B might go to a discount, and then you'd unwind the whole transaction rather than convert. I mean, there are a lot of techniques that Charlie and I have engaged in over the years, and other securities that apply to that sort of thing. But shorting doesn't hurt us in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. I don't care whether the short interest in the A is 1,000 shares or 100,000 shares. You know, somebody sells it at one point and somebody buys it at another point, and whether you reverse the buying and selling doesn't make any difference. What counts is the intrinsic value of Berkshire. And if we increase the value of Berkshire at a reasonable rate, you know, the shorts will have to figure out how to eat 3 times a day. Okay, zone 5, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Grant Morgan. I'm here from New York City. Earlier you had acknowledged that it is a more difficult investment and business environment today than it was when you first started out. My question is, if you were starting out again today in your early 30s, what would you do differently or the same in today's environment to replicate your success? In short, Mr. Buffett, how can I make $30 billion?
Start young. Charlie's always said that the big thing about it is we started building this little snowball on top of a very long hill. So we started at a very early age in rolling the snowball down. And of course, the snowball, the nature of compound interest is it behaves like a snowball of sticky snow. And the trick is to have a very long hill, which means either starting very young or living to be very old. I would do it exactly the same way if I were doing it in the investment world. I mean, if I were getting out of school today and I had $10,000 to invest, I'd start with the A's. I would start going right through companies, and I probably would focus on smaller companies because I would be working with smaller sums, and there's more chance that something is overlooked in that arena. And as Charlie has said earlier, it won't be like doing that in 1951 when you could leaf through and find all kinds of things that just leapt off the page at you. But that's the only way to do it. I mean, you have to buy businesses or little pieces of businesses called stocks, and you have to buy them at attractive prices, and you have to buy them you have to buy into good businesses. And that advice will be the same 100 years from now in terms of investing. That's what it's all about. And you can't expect anybody else to do it for you. I mean, people will not tell you about wonderful little investments. It's not the way the investment business is set up. When I first visited Geico in January of 1951, and that rest of that year, I subsequently went down to Blythe and Company and actually to one other firm that was a leading Geyer and Company, that was a leading analyst in insurance. And I thought I'd discovered this wonderful thing, and I'd see what these great investment houses that specialized in insurance stocks said, and they said I didn't know what I was talking about. It wasn't of any interest to them. You've got to follow your own. You've got to learn what you know and what you don't know, and within the arena of what you know, you have to pursue it very vigorously and act on it when you find it. And you can't look around for people to agree with you. You can't look around for people to even know what you're talking about. You have to think for yourself. And if you do, you'll find things. Charlie?
Yeah, the hard part of the process for most people is the first $100,000. If you have a standing start at zero, getting together $100,000 is a long struggle for most people. And I would argue that the people who get there relatively quickly are helped if they're passionate about being rational, very eager and opportunistic, and steadily underspend their income grossly. I think those three factors are very helpful.
Zone 6.
Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, thank you very much for your hospitality. Excuse me, my name is Yvonne Edmonds, and I'm from St. Petersburg, Florida. And thank you also for being so kind as to spend all this time answering our questions. I have two related questions regarding insurance. The first is, I suspect that many of us know less about insurance than about equities. And I wonder if you could please put some references for us on the Berkshire Hathaway website that might help us increase our knowledge about insurance. The second question is perhaps related to the first. The fact that I don't understand it, but the Wall Street Journal on March 19 published an article entitled, "When Insurers Pass Trash, Some Are Left Holding the Bag." And that some included Berkshire Hathaway. It focused on passing the workers' comp trash to, among other groups, to Cologne Re. And to make a long story short, the Assistant General Counsel for General Re, which, as I understand now, owns most of Cologne Re, said this is a classic example of an insurance company seeking growth in a very competitive market by writing business outside its area of expertise, namely within workers' comp when their area of expertise is life reinsurance. Mr. Graham went on to say, and then I'll stop, don't write business you don't understand. Second, proper controls are critical in the insurance business. Lastly, if a business opportunity appears to be too good to be true, it probably is. If this is true, could you tell us how this came about, what measures are being taken to see that it won't happen again, and what might be the ultimate cost to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders? Because I gather that only the tip of the iceberg has been represented in the charge to Cologne Re.
Okay, those are good questions. And let's take the first one first about the website and having a list of reference documents or something that would help you understand insurance. You sound like you understand it pretty well already. I can't think of a good book that I've read on the subject. I got my knowledge of insurance by reading, well, I got this huge head fellow named Lorimer Davidson, who is now 96, spend 4 hours or so with me one Saturday morning in January 1951, explaining to me how GEICO worked. And it was a marvelous education, and it got me so interested in not only how GEICO worked, but how its competitors worked, how the industry worked, that I just started reading a lot of other reports. I guess I took one course in school on insurance. I don't remember a thing from it. I have no idea what the textbook was or anything. It had no value to me. So I never really had any background in insurance. Nobody in the family was in the insurance business. And until I talked to Davy, it just hadn't been something that crossed my mind. The only reason I was down there was because my hero, Ben Graham, was listed in Who's Who as being the chairman of Government Employees Insurance. If he'd been the chairman of, he was also the chairman of the Market Street Railway Company in San Francisco. Fortunately, I went down to GEICO instead of out to see the Market Street Railway Company. It was closer. But my own education about insurance came from just reading lots of reports. I would say that if I started the day fresh and I didn't know anything about the insurance industry to speak of, and I wanted to develop some expertise, I would probably read the reports of every property casualty company around, and I would go back sometime and I would probably get the best manuals and look at them. I would just do a lot of reading. I used to go down to the Department of Insurance in Lincoln and go through the convention reports and the examination reports, and they'd give me some little table someplace, and I keep asking for these reports. They have to go way down to the bottom of the Capitol to get them out for me, but they didn't have much else to do, so they were always happy to do it. And that's the way I learned about it. And it happened to be a productive field to learn about that way. And I really think that something akin to that is the best way now. I can't think of, you can read some analyst reports. I think you can learn something, frankly, by reading the Berkshire Hathaway annuals for 20 years and